because man's task is to make the earth after the model of heaven. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Man's project is to heavenize the earth. Man is made to transform the world from glory to glory, to take hold of it and break it down and remake it after the image of heaven.
Welcome back to the Reformed Reset. My name is Grant, and joined with me is my beautiful wife, Ericha, the weaker vessel.
Hello, everyone.
And we also have the great privilege of having our good friends, fellow congregants here up in the state of Maine. Yes, it's a state in the U.S., Maine. Jake and Eryn Lajoie. Welcome, guys. How you doing?
Hello. Good.
Welcome back. We've had them on before.
Yes. Did we have them on before?
Yeah. Well, Jake's been on a couple times, and then we had them on.
We had our Paedo baptism conversion.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
When you were born again into being a Presbyterian. Yeah. So if you guys just finished listening to our Covenant Theology series and you're wondering about the Paedo baptism thing and what the journey coming to that conviction looks like, go back in the archives on our YouTube channel and you can find a episode that we had with the beautiful Jake and Eryn Lajoie.
I feel like you should start with the beautiful Eryn and Jake Lajoie.
They're both beautiful. They're both beautiful. I'm not going to hurt your feelings, Jake, or lie to you. So yeah, go check that out. Guys, if you would, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell, like the video, comment, do all those things. Help us out to get into that YouTube algorithm. If you're in podcast world, subscribe to the podcast in whatever app you're using and leave us a review there. That would help us out. And go in the description below. We have links to our social media, our website. And also, if you want to financially support us, please become a patron. So go to patreon.com/takeholdstudios. And for $5 a month, you can help us out a ton. And you get the access to submit questions. You get the privilege of submitting questions for our monthly Q&A.
You get to write our script.
There you go. And we'll put all that together every month and do a Q&A episode. And again, like I've been saying, if we get some more patrons and some interest on there, then we'll be motivated to do some more stuff. So our merch store also is down below. And we should start talking about the Advent devotional.
Yeah, we should. Yep.
So Erica and I had the privilege of writing a family Advent devotional, kind of a family worship guide for Advent a couple of years ago. It's called Behold Your King. I'll put a comment in the description below. And I mean, if you have questions, ask us, but we wrote it for our family and benefited tremendously from it. And then
our kids were young at the time. I would say it's geared more towards younger children.
Yeah. So I think our kids were
Nora was
all 2
under
or
10,
3, and then Lila 7. So kind of that 2 to 8 age was our kids at the time. It's still beneficial for kids older, but if you have little kids and you're wondering, right?
Yeah.
Is it going to work?
Are they
going to
understand?
Family?
Or
Very basic and very helpful. We've pretty much always got good feedback from it. So I think it's been always good.
Christmas, so.
Say that again. Sorry, it broke up.
We used it last Christmas, so it was very
awesome.
Fun.
There you go. There you go. We have a salesperson for our.
I think ordering it early is a good idea because we have had several people who had a hard time getting it before Christmas.
Right. Because Advent starts tail end of November, early December. But I think ours starts December 1st, technically. But yeah.
You can get it on Barnes & Noble or Amazon. There tend to be limited copies there. And the easiest way is to order it from Ezra Press.
Yeah.
But that's Canadian, so it takes a while to ship. So
well, and then if you want to go the ebook route at ezrapress.ca, you can actually just purchase it ebook.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
And then you'll get a PDF of it. Some people like the paper copy. I am of that persuasion.
And they're cheap. They're like $5, I think.
Yep. Yeah, it's like $5. So anyway.
So that's Canadian dollars too.
Yeah.
Was that?
We got ours for free. You just handed us one at church, I think. So
That's right.
we
had
had the
a
hookup.
few. That's right. What do they call those? Like, I don't know, author copies or something
Yeah.
like that. Anyway, we had a few. And anyway, so Behold Your King, look it up, get prepared for Advent. And
It's never too early to get a jump on Christmas.
no.
I'm already listening to Christmas music, like Christmas hymns on my way home from work.
Yes.
I
So-
support this.
I endorse this message.
Christmas is a state of mind. That's what I like to say.
True.
I love that. That's awesome. All right. Well, I think that's enough of the
Well, speaking of Christmas, we have to rewind a little bit and go back to Halloween.
Yes.
boom.
Yes.
Segue for the ages. So this is October, and we wanted to really do a deep dive into this Halloween topic. And this whole month, we're going to be doing deep, weird.
That's because
Topics.
Christians act deeply weird during this month. Have you noticed that?
My family acted deeply weird during
I mean,
Halloween for sure.
mine didn't really, but I'm just like, this is the one thing that causes Christians division. Like, it's nobody's business. Like, if you mention this in Christian circles, you just know someone's going to disagree with you.
It's one of those things
Automatically.
that you don't talk about a ton, but when it gets brought up, people have super strong opinions
Yeah.
about.
Yes.
Yep.
And it's like deeply religious opinions. Like you're sinning if you don't have my opinion. A lot of the time.
Yes.
True.
Yeah.
How did you guys what was it like growing up? How was Halloween treated as you were growing up?
So for me, my parents were staunchly like no Halloween, none of it. We were
Pretty
the
much
family
same
that
here.
turned all of our lights off and pretended we weren't home so that nobody showed
Yep.
up because, you know, we wouldn't participate in any way, shape, or form growing up.
Yeah, my parents were pretty, laid back about it. I never really went trick-or-treating. That was more of a distrust of strangers thing on my parents' part.
Probably fair.
But it wasn't really made a big deal out of, but it wasn't like, Halloween's a devil holiday or anything like that. I
Yeah.
went to a
Right.
couple Halloween parties as a kid where I dressed up. I went trick-or-treating to like only people we knew once when I was probably like 4 or 5. When I got
Yeah.
to be a teenager, I would watch the occasional, scary movie, things like that. But my parents didn't really care one way or the other about Halloween.
All right.
That's
Pretty-
kind of how my family was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much more mild. My experience was much more like yours, Aaron. It was like we would rent a movie and like we would get candy and popcorn,
Yep.
but we'd all have to go to my parents' room. And that was the only room there was any light. And then
That's
everything
exactly- Got all the lights off.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because
So-
Christians live in the light, not in the darkness.
that's right. That's why we hid. That's why we went and hid in one room of the house.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, you didn't want to party with the devil for crying out loud.
Right. So dwell in darkness, man.
My neighborhood
So-
is not good for. We never got trick-or-treaters. Like, we didn't
Oh,
turn our
really?
lights off. My entire life growing up, I lived in the same house. I can think of like 2 years where we got one kid. Like, people just didn't trick-or-treat where I lived.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons Christians end up, disdaining the holiday is because of its origins, supposedly. I have to say that. I can't just grant them their position, but it's supposedly the origins are completely evil and completely pagan. And of course, what does a Christian have to do with paganism and, evil, wicked holidays? And so we shouldn't partake. So I'll ask as kind of a prodding question, do the origins matter? What do you guys think?
Matter for what is the question?
Whether
Yes.
do the origins matter with celebrating the holiday?
My opinion is both yes and no.
All right.
And I can elaborate once we get into more of
Okay.
what the origins are, I suppose.
So yeah, it matters to a degree in that the people who say it's exclusively pagan aren't correct.
Right.
So in that sense, the origins matter. But even if it was correct, it doesn't mean it's an irredeemable day.
Correct.
Right.
So in that
Very
sense,
good.
I don't think it matters. It matters in the fact that they're wrong. but it doesn't matter as far as whether or not we can make something good out of it. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and also, you know, just the fact that the holiday we have now is it's just a secular American holiday. Yes, the origins matter, and the origins are actually quite interesting, and Christian, but but ultimately, like, it's a secular, fun American thing that's kind of just evolved to be what it is over the years. So even if it's kind of like how non-Christians celebrate Christmas too, you know what I mean? It's a holiday that, you know.
Yeah, that's good. Do you want to share some of the origins, Eryn?
Yeah, so you'll find a lot of different sources out there that will all generally say the same thing, but with different emphasis. So what you'll commonly hear, especially from both the modern day pagans as well as the Christians who want to be like, scary bad, this is very pagan. You'll hear that the origins was from the Druid holiday Samhain, or however you want to pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
It's got an H in it. Don't pronounce it. It's confusing. And, you know, the truth is people know very, very little about this holiday. There's not much out there, and what is out there was from writings from the Romans, who were the Druids and the Celtics' enemies. So the sources are kind of vague, but yes, this was a pagan holiday. It was it was a harvest festival, essentially. There may or may not have been human sacrifice involved. You know, not great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the story that you hear a lot of the time is, oh, well, you know, the Catholic Church came along and said, we're going to move our All Saints Day to this day to try to convert the pagans. Now, my personal opinion is that that's not correct.
Yeah.
It's just happened that, like, every culture had a fall festival of some kind, and in a lot of them they were about, you know, remembering and honoring the dead, as you would see, like, in Dios de los Muertos in Mexico, and you know, things like that, which is kind of where you get All Saints Day being November 1st. So November 1st, All Saints Day, or All Hallows Day, and the night before would have been All Hallows Even, shortened to Halloween eventually. And it was just a festival at the time that was a church celebration that they would remember all of the saints that had passed, and on November 2nd they would celebrate the recent passings of family members and things like that. And then, you know, interestingly enough, you like to talk about things like trick-or-treating. The origin for that is commonly somewhat accepted is that the poorer peoples in these Christian communities would go door to door, and the people in those houses would give them soul cakes in exchange for them praying for the souls of the dead, which is a very like Catholic purgatory type situation.
Right.
Yeah.
And so essentially how I kind of summarize it when people talk about the origins of Halloween is people be like, oh, well, this is the pagan holiday. Well, let's just grant them that and say, sure, let's say that that's where the day came from. If anything, it would have only lent the day, like the general time frame. None of the traditions carried over. Pretty much all of the traditions that are in the modern day Halloween celebration do have some sort of religious origin from All Saints Day and All Hallows Eve. So,
nice.
There's more to it than that, about different like things, but that's kind of the general overview of where you get it.
Awesome. And I want to point people to a essay that James Jordan wrote called Halloween's Improbable Origin and Meaning for Christians. It's posted on AmericanVision.org.
We'll share it on our Take
yeah.
Old Studios page too.
Yeah, we'll share that because it's really helpful. It has a lot of what Eryn just shared with you guys. And you know what, Eryn, when you were talking about how a lot of people had seasonal holidays, it made me think of the Feast of First Fruits that God gave to the nation of Israel. Like they celebrated harvest time too.
Right.
That was a very normal thing to do, except what they did was recognize that all this blessing came from God.
Right.
Which I would venture to say, whatever truth that the Catholic Church, or just, Christendom at the time in Western culture, whatever truth they recognized, they would have, it wouldn't have stopped there. They would have rolled that up to praise for God and gratitude for God. It's like, hey, you know what? That is a good thing to celebrate during harvest time. And it so happens to coincide with All Hallows Eve.
Right.
So anyway, very good. So this actually perfectly segues into the other thing we wanted to talk about, because you briefly mentioned, Eryn, like how like the church encountered this holiday and how they treated it.
Mm-hmm.
We are fond of pointing out at any time possible when things are post-mill, or when things resemble anything that's post-mill. How might postmillennialism at least change the way you think about this happening, the church encountering this holiday?
Well, I think like before you can even get into any of that, you have to first address what it is that Christians are pushing against. What is it that some Christians are fearful of, or are trying to remove themselves from, or, you know what I mean? Like trying to distance themselves from. And that's obviously like any perception of the demonic, any perception of like joining themselves to the demonic, or worshiping the demonic, or whatever. And just really bad eschatology when it comes. Well, first of all, just bad theology, actually, because I think a lot of Christians don't have a good theology of like angels and demons and like the spiritual realm in general. Like that's just not a thing that most of us are dwelling on very often. But we should, actually, because it's kind of
real.
It's real, and like we all believe in it, but
and it's there whether you like it or not, or talk about it or not.
Yeah, but most of us don't think too much about it. At least I didn't. Until we were, faced with having to like talk about some of these things and sort some of these things out. And naturally, like you wouldn't want to align yourself with the devil. Like what Christian wants to do that?
Stands to reason.
Yeah, so that's fair, right? Like that's a fair thing. I don't want to, I don't know, like make fun of someone for that. Like I think that's a good desire.
Yeah. Well, we're called to be holy. We're called to, flee from youthful lusts. We're called like all these things. And so in one sense, the person with bad eschatology or bad theology flees from the holiday and has no thought, like you're talking about, Jake, of redeeming it. In one sense, they're totally in support of, like, scripture supports that sentiment.
Right.
But like that picture of the family hiding in the back room of the house with all the other lights off, that's a beautiful picture of just the retreatist dispensational theology that has taken
but like
a lot of people.
I can remember being a child, like 12, 13, and like reading through the Gospels and like hating reading the parts where like Jesus cast out demons, because it would freak me out. Like I didn't like those parts. It was scary. It was like a horror film, like who wants to like listen to this demon talk to Jesus? That it's like super scary. I didn't love it.
Not your favorite?
Wasn't my favorite part. But like this was just like I was not given a framework to understand.
Right.
Like the demons were created. They were not creator. They did not have dominion over Jesus, right? Like he has conquered Satan and hell, like Christ has, I mean. And so like these things don't need to be feared in the same way that they, you know what I mean? Like that was never really explained to me, I guess. So maybe you start there.
Yeah.
And then you roll into the eschatology.
Yeah. So going from that to how our eschatology would affect how we even look at this, Jake. What would you say?
So I'd probably actually put, to be maybe like a dissenting voice, I'd maybe put less of an emphasis on the post-mill aspect of it than some might, because I could theoretically see people who are still post-mill saying there's nothing redeemable about the horror genre, if they were just like super
True.
up about horror in general. Because obviously there's certain things that, in a post-millennial framework, they're not redeemed, they just go away. There's no, to just take like a radical example, we're going to redeem prostitution. Well, what that looks like is it going away.
Right.
So I could theoretically see somebody say, well, horror movies just don't have anything redeeming about them.
Halloween doesn't have anything.
And Halloween doesn't have anything redeeming about it. And so they would kind of have the more, we'll turn all the lights off and hide in the lone room at the end of the house. And now, obviously, post-mill people are generally just more optimistic in general about things. But I could still see some people being against the genre still, and just saying that, like, it's a worldly thing and it should just kind of go away.
I think a lot of the problem people have is they give the demonic far too much power. So they act like if you participate in Halloween by having your kid dress up like a superhero and go trick-or-treating, that you're somehow accidentally worshiping the devil.
Right.
You can't accidentally worship Satan. That's not how that works.
It's like you can't accidentally worship God.
Yes, exactly. Just like you can't accidentally, that's not how it works. So, the post-mill aspect of it being that, knowing that, God has conquered all of these things already, and we are not currently, we don't need to be worried about, the devil's winning and the demons winning. They've already lost.
Right.
And we're currently going to just keep winning. Christ has already won, and he's going to keep winning. So a lot of this that people are so afraid of, Halloween is glorifying the demonic, and it's putting all these things on on some type of worshipful pedestal, when in actuality, a lot of it's mocking. And, there's a reason why Satan is depicted like a dude in a little red jumpsuit with a pitchfork tail, because that's goofy, and you're goofy, Satan, like you've lost, it's there's no reason to be as fearful as many of especially dispensational Christians are, that somehow you can invite evil into your home and into your children because they like to dress up like a dog.
Right. And that's what God does, right? Doesn't God laugh at his enemies?
Yep.
Isn't that what scripture says? So if God laughs at his enemies and we're supposed to act holy like God, then I think we should mock our enemies as well. And Halloween is a great time. And this is one of the things that I can remember coming to a realization of years ago. Do you remember, like, there was one Halloween, it must have been like 2018, I don't know, when everyone was dressed up like Trump and Hillary for Halloween?
Yeah.
Everyone had like the Trump and Hillary mask on, and it was funny because they were like making fun of Trump and Hillary, they were a joke. They weren't glorifying them. They were mocking them and making fun of them.
Right.
And I remember thinking, like, if we can do that with people, how much more should we be doing that with like the demonic world? We should be dressing our kids up as like witches and ghosts. And I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying, like, that would be an okay thing because we're making fun of it. If that's what you're doing, if you're making fun of it. If you're dressing your kids up like a witch because like you actually want them to like participate in witchcraft, don't do that.
Right.
But I don't think many Christians are doing that. Most Christians are doing it because they think it's like silly or cute or funny because it has nothing to do with like the reality of God's world. You know what I mean?
Like a real witch isn't gonna look like the caricature that you see because it's a joke.
Exactly.
They're gonna look like someone on TikTok.
Yeah.
Yeah, true story.
And if somebody dressed up like Trump really believed they were Trump, or if they wore that costume, they really believed that they were participating in some of the power of the Orange Man. Like, you would
That's
just
crazy.
think they're nuts, and you wouldn't take it serious. You just, okay, man, we'll get you back to your room, like, and so when people, even the people who do call themselves witches or whatever, that's exactly how we should treat them too, because we know, like, even though the demonic realm and the spiritual realm is real, it's defeated. I've always say, like, if they had guns, right, their magazines are empty. Like, Jesus emptied everything, took all their weapons away. They're there and they're trying to still fight against God's people, but they're chained, right? Satan's chained, he's bound. The power of the gospel is way more powerful than any deception he tries to spread amongst
and this is where
world.
that eschatology really comes into, I suppose, because like there are some Christians though who think that Satan is still the boss here, right? That Satan is still like the guy in charge. He's the guy who's going to win everything, and like Jesus is king of heaven, surely, but he's not Lord of the earth.
They forgot that little bit of the Great Commission.
Going to win, but he currently we're under Satan's dominion. That's
he'll only win after a whole ton of losing. Then he'll win.
Yeah, we don't believe that.
No, he said all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, and then it was on that authority that we were given our mission to disciple the nations.
In that article that Grant had mentioned, I know, Eryn, you've read it. I don't know if you have, Jake. But James Jordan talks about like these beautiful cathedrals that were built and how the gargoyles on the outside were like ugly, deformed, like demonic looking things. But they were facing outward on the buildings because they were mocking any evil forces coming against like the church, essentially.
Yeah, like sticking their tongues out
like,
at
them. Like wagging against the evil that dared come against God's church. Yeah. And Eryn and I are both like, I really want a gargoyle somewhere now. Like, this is just such a cool like image, right? Like,
that is cool.
But in a sense, like, I kind of want our kids to dress up as gargoyles on Halloween. Like, that's rad.
I'm here for it. You got my vote.
It's a cool image, and it really changes your perspective. Like, no, go conquer Halloween, and then even go beyond Halloween. Like, Christians should just have this mindset of it belongs to God. So we're gonna like make it maybe there are people who celebrate Halloween wrong right now. I can even agree there are people who do weird things on Halloween. So let's make it Christian. Let's make it more Christian.
Right? Like, so, no. Go ahead.
Yeah, people go the other direction with it. So they see the bad things that people do on Halloween or surrounding Halloween, and they go, we can't have any part in this. We're going to slink away in our back room and turn all the lights off. When in actuality, why are you letting them take something that doesn't belong to them? Right. And that you see that all the time, pagans and sinful people, the rainbow, that's God's. They can't take it. You know what I mean? It doesn't belong to them.
And language. How much language had they stolen from us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are going to be people. Yeah. So there's going to be evil people doing evil things on Halloween. But
for Christians, you're always still under the law of Christ. So whatever you do unto the glory of God, whether you eat or drink, whether you celebrate Halloween or Easter or 4th of July, you still don't do it like a pagan would. Right. You celebrate that holiday in a way that still glorifies God, and it's a great catechetical moment for kids, parents, where you can teach them the realities of the spiritual realm. Yes, it's real. We know families who literally like hardly ever talk about it to their kids, and our kids were talking or made some mention of demons, and it was like their other kid was, wait, what are you talking about? And it was almost overwhelming or spooky to them, like, wait, what? And it's like, we need to be able to teach our kids how to think about those things, because it is real. And
all over scripture, like I said, it freaked me out when I was a kid, and it shouldn't have. And
Halloween is a great time to explain that stuff, right? I think it's C.S. Lewis in Screwtape Letters, where basically the devil is saying, maybe it's not there, but it sounds like it should be. But basically, like the greatest lie that Satan tells people is that he doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the greatest deception that people fall into.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, it should be a good teaching moment for all of our kids so that they understand reality as it really is.
Right.
So, so piggybacking off of the Halloween discussion, let's talk about the horror genre. I guess in general,
I think
movies.
Jake touched on that for like a minute ago.
Yeah, he kind of dipped his toe in there real quick. Well, let's dive in. So what do you guys think? Does the horror genre belong in Christian life at all?
I think it can.
Yep.
I
don't
actually think
firemen
it should.
Oh, okay.
I think it should.
Weaker vessel laying down the law.
I think that far too many Christians are cowards. That's what I think. I think far too many Christians, and we can blame whoever we want to blame, whether it's
they're gonna blame you.
Pastors, that's fine. I'm used to being blamed for everything.
She said it.
That's why I'm the weaker vessel.
That's right.
The thing is that too many Christians are cowards.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that like we should all sit around and watch every single horror movie
or play with a Ouija board
or play with the Ouija board. No, that's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the world is actually full of evil.
Yep.
And it's our Christians' job to understand it and to have a cure for it.
Right.
And far too many of us are like not equipped at all to deal with the reality of the world. We live in this like, this first world country, and if we were ever faced with a third world problem, we would have no concept of even how to deal with it. But then you think of Christians, missionaries in like Haiti or in other parts of the world where like the reality of like the world really is full of darkness. Like the world is full of all kinds of darkness, all kinds of evil. And it's our job to go into it and actually change that, like by the power of the Spirit, obviously. But so many Christians would have no concept that we would just like be deer in headlights if we ever actually came upon it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. True. What do you guys think? What thoughts do you have?
I think that's pretty. I don't know if I would come down as strongly on it, but I definitely like agree with all of that. Yeah, my personal opinion is, I think the horror genre can have a very beneficial place in the Christian circle. Now, I understand that people have preferences. So if someone is more easily scared or more easily, bothered by certain things, then, by all means, you don't have to watch something that completely freaks you out. But the principle of, oh, well, it's labeled horror, so this is evil and bad, and Christians shouldn't participate in it.
Right.
I strongly disagree with that.
Yeah, I think, and a lot of it, too, with people just being too uptight, is a lot of it, I mean, it's not real. So, like, a lot of people who say, like, they won't do anything horror-related because, vampires or whatever are demonic. It's like, vampires aren't...
Yeah.
So, like, there's that element of it, too. So, like, horror has, a lot of times... I mean, some of it is just, like, trash, and there's nothing edifying about it whatsoever.
There's a good deal of it that's trash.
Right. But then, there's also, a lot of just kind of traditional, like, good and evil in horror movies that just happen to be scary. And, real life can be scary. I mean, not all horror, a lot of horror is grounded in reality. There's nothing supernatural or demonic or anything like that, but it's still, life is scary kind of thing. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of different elements to it. But yeah, that's one I think that's neglected much is people who are just a little too uptight because it's not real. A werewolf movie, like werewolves aren't real. Like there's no reason to, there's nothing satanic about complete fiction.
Well, but this is the cool thing about like certain kinds of horror. Did you ever watch the old movie? The one that I watched was the old one. The Town That Dreaded Sundown. You know that one? It was like a...
I think I've heard of it, but I don't think I've ever seen it.
So it was like
break out of jail or something?
No. I don't know. The perpetrator was never caught. So this is like old, like my father watched it when he was like a young man.
True story?
It's based on a true story that
Kansas or
happened in
something?
Texarkana.
Oh, Texarkana.
So Texas, Arkansas border. Anyway,
In Louisiana.
but there's like a lot of like Lover's Lane sort of stuff happening where like the two kids go off to park and then this like serial murderer finds them and he has the hook thing in the car and like there's so much horror, right? Like that one actually isn't scary because it was like made in the 60s or something. But like that really has like a morality attached to it. Like
it's like a justice theme.
Well, like if you fornicate, like you're gonna die, basically, you know, like there are rules to horror movies.
We were talking about that earlier, you know, just before we came on, is that a lot of people back in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, the classic like slasher movie, people complained, or maybe not complained, but pointed out that there was like kind of a puritanical like underlying morality. There was always like, you know, the chaste young woman that was the only one that lived at the end,
and the promiscuous
everyone
one
else
died first.
Right, and it was always the you know, the promiscuous people fooling around that got, you know, axed first.
Yeah.
And you know,
I think, isn't it Nathaniel Hawthorne who wrote The Scarlet Letter too?
Yeah.
Right? Like there's layers to good. I think this is what makes good horror. Good horror actually does tell a story that is based in reality versus bad horror where like the bad guy is the victor. Do you know what I mean? Like where the bad guy is the big hero of the story.
Well, there are movies where evil and darkness is glorified and praised, and it's the hero of the story. That would be a perverted story. But a lot of these movies and shows and stuff, evil is still just portrayed as evil, and you want it to stop, and it's this whole, you know, twisted tale of how it stops or whatever. But that's an accurate story,
right,
of reality,
right? Because good stories are based on reality.
Yeah, all the best ones.
I mean, yeah, all the good ones at least.
Right.
Anyway, so like that's, I think it was Bram Stoker's Dracula 2 was supposed to be a Christian novel. Because it showed like the sexual lure of Dracula as being demonic and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of really good morality and good lessons in horror that actually do, I think, illustrate how bad evil is and how good prevails against evil. Prevail against
a lot
evil.
of people can't or are unwilling to differentiate between depiction and glorification.
Correct.
Yes.
So like that new, we haven't watched it yet, but that new like, you know, Jeffrey Dahmer Netflix show. Yeah. There's a big difference between just making a show about Jeffrey Dahmer and making Jeffrey Dahmer the hero. Good guy. Like yes, if we're watching something that makes Jeffrey Dahmer the good guy, I'd say that's
perversion.
Bad.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between just telling a story with evil in it. Because we live in the real world, and a story that glorifies evil as, you know, the good of the story.
Right.
But some people say, it glorifies violence or it glorifies this when it just depicts it, and they don't seem to make the distinction.
Right. And that's like actually an article I read today that was kind of going into that, saying that, you know, if anything, the horror genre is one of the most pure depictions of good versus evil that you can find. It might be one of the most, you know, morally accurate, I guess you could say, forms of media. And I think that that's very interesting because I never actually thought about that take on it, but it makes sense that it's just very, you know, the dichotomy's there. Now, you know, I believe that that's might be a segue, but like it doesn't make all horror permissible. So
certainly not. No,
there are things that, you know, aren't okay. Just with any genre of television or movie, it's not exclusive to horror.
Yes,
you know, you got to use judgment on that. And
well, it's like comedy, right? Like,
true.
Christians ought to watch comedy. Christians need to know how to laugh. Christians need to know how to make a joke, how to take a joke. Like, we need to learn to be funny. And there's like a lot of humor in the Bible, things that are actually pretty funny.
Super,
and we can't just be like, Well, there's a lot of like smut in comedies, so I'm just never gonna like watch a comedy. I just can't. Like, it's not my thing. Like, well, you're probably the person who should. You need to loosen up a little bit,
Or
you know?
take it all in either. Right?
Yeah, yeah. But that doesn't mean that you watch every single comedy that comes up, because there are a lot that are filthy.
Yeah. And that's the development of a Christian worldview, where you just have a Christian worldview that you approach everything with, and you know how, you know, what to accept and what to reject as you encounter the world in all of its forms and all of its beauty that God gave us.
Yes.
I wanted to make a comment, Jake, just real quick before we continue, about the horror genre and some of the things are just not real. And there's more of a whole scale, you know, denial of or toss out of all the horror stuff because of that, right? It's just all so bad. And even though a lot of it's not real, or even movies that depict real things, it is still not real. Yet a lot of other movies really have husbands and wives on set kissing, or other problems where it's nudity or something else, that like there's a real thing that's happening, but that will get excused or just fast forwarded.
Right.
But then a whole genre gets tossed out.
Right.
And I think I said in a sermon recently about how we get so wrapped up in something like the horror genre rather than the horror happening at Capitol Hill, where the certain laws that are passed or certain things are protected that leads to the murder of thousands of unborn babies or whatever. Like, that's a true horror story.
And that actually is exactly what I think I was trying to get to. Maybe I didn't say it clearly, but like, there's so many Christians who are so disengaged from the reality of the abortions that are happening down the street.
Yeah.
They know that they exist. They know it's bad. They do not support it. Of course, they'll vote against it. But when it comes to actually having to like be a physical presence on like the premises of a Planned Parenthood, or having to like dialogue over what happens during an abortion with someone who maybe doesn't know, like they're just far too squeamish. They're far too like, I don't know, prudish or whatever the word would be.
Yeah.
But it's like, Christians can't be prudes either. We can't be so prudish. We can't have our collars buttoned so tightly that we can't engage on things that are happening in the world.
Right.
We have to.
Yeah.
We have to be okay with engaging things that are gross, that are demonic, or that are just horrible.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, it's like you don't need to watch a horror movie about abortion to get the concept across. So like how talking about how a lot of it's not real. It's like, yeah, that's true. You know, vampires and stuff aren't real, but it can teach very true concepts about just human gravity. You know, Frankenstein's a great example of that. It's all very much about the true monster was Dr. Frankenstein. Yeah. It wasn't the monster he created. It's all just kind of about human condition, human depravity. And you can kind of springboard off of that in a lot of concepts. You know?
You? Well, you were just talking about The Portrait of Dorian Gray last night, too.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite books, actually. Such a good book.
Yeah. I think I put that in a homework assignment or something, maybe. But no, Frankenstein, I think my theory, I'll have to read it again, but I think my theory was that in the book, they're actually the same person. Because if you read the book, they're never in the same like place and other people seeing them. From what I remember, you don't see you don't see the monster and the doctor at the same time, and like other people too. Like he can talk to himself maybe. Anyway, I'll have to read it again to see if my theory stands, but that would still line up with what you're saying about just human depravity and and being a monster essentially. So
and we are
right, yeah, it's true. Right. How does the true crime genre play into all of this? Because that would be real events that happen.
Once again, Jake just mentioned the Jeffrey Dahmer thing.
Right. And he's always prepping. He lobs the softball up.
Way to go, Jake.
He hasn't seen the outline, so he's just kind of going with it.
Yeah.
That means the spirit is working, Jake. It's working. It's working amongst us. It's moving. So for real. True crime genre, because that is real stuff that really has happened. How do we approach something like that?
I mean, I always come in hot, so maybe someone else should start.
I mean, it's very similar to the way that you would approach horror, if not even more so. That because it is real, crime is real, and I think you're doing yourself and people around you kind of a disservice by not knowing how awful things are. Pretending that things don't happen, kind of like we were talking about the abortion thing. Like, yeah, they know it happens and they kind of just keep it in the back burner and they don't like to think about it because it makes them squeamish. It's like, well, then you're not actually going to be as aggressive about fighting against it. And I feel as in true crime too, is like knowing about these things and learning about true events that happened is just going to further prepare you for what you encounter in the world. But it's kind of my take.
We watch quite a bit of true crime.
I listen to a lot of podcasts too.
And then you also listen to. But I have found that watching true crime just makes me all the more a theonomist than ever.
It's true.
Because you hear the cases and what happens and how either people are wrongfully accused or wrongfully given life in prison, or people that the evidence is absolutely clear. I mean, there's way more than 2 or 3 witnesses, and then they still get 10 years and they're out, or they get life and then they're out in 5 years or something.
Yeah.
And you're like, justice, come on. And it's God's law that I'm like, if we only had God's law, this person would be, we'd have capital punishment and justice would be served and this family would be blessed by that. And
I think it's the more that I discuss true crime with even non-Christians, and I'll say things like, oh, wouldn't God's law be better here? And they'll be like, what? And I'd be like, think about it. And I'll explain what God's law would be in certain situations. They'd be like, yeah, that would be better, actually. And it almost is like even the non-Christian can see the wisdom in God's law when it comes to a lot of true crime.
Right.
Which is kind of cool, actually. But I think the human heart, we know that God exists. We might suppress that truth and unrighteousness, but we all know. And because of that, we seek justice. We seek true justice. And when justice isn't served, or when crimes go unsolved, it just feels like we're lacking the ending, because we are. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the great thing about true crime, is that it really does point you, if you're, if the story is once again told correctly, it can point you to the person who is just, like the just king.
Yeah, good points.
I don't have much to say just because I actually don't listen or watch a ton of true crime stuff. Because I'm not, a white male.
Wow.
That's probably more a you and Ericha thing. But
stay-at-home moms have more time to listen.
I would agree with what you said. I just don't consume a lot of true crime stuff. But I do think there is a little bit of hypocrisy with people, with what they consume and what they say is, going too far, because they wouldn't put, if somebody just thought up just use the Jeffrey Dahmer show as an example. If somebody thought that up as a fictional story about a serial killer and how he was caught and everything, people would condemn that as glorifying evil. But when it's a true crime thing, it's based in real life, they just look at it as like, oh, well, it's just a documentary. It's like, well, art in life. So I don't really see any difference between consuming a fictional story, like I said, as long as the evil isn't being promoted as a good thing, and watching something like a true crime show or listening to a true crime podcast, because there really is no difference at all between the Dahmer show, if it's based on real life, or if it was just thought up by somebody as being the compelling story. The principle is the same.
Humans are terrible without God. That's the ultimate story.
It's true. Well, and
really, really bad.
Of his supposed conversion. And I'm curious that will be in there.
Yeah.
But see, that bothers people because they
Right.
want him to just pay. And so
Right.
the idea of him possibly being forgiven and him being in heaven
Yeah.
is
Right.
unthinkable because of the things that he did, which were heinous. But yeah, I mean,
But if he
Apostle
did
Paul
actually,
killed Christians.
yeah, like if he did actually convert, then that's like what an incredible story. Like
Yeah.
rejoice, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
we
I-
should.
Yeah, and I don't see any reason to think maybe a little bit of rabbit trail, but it seems by all accounts that he did experience a real conversion based on.
Wow.
Obviously, we don't know everything that we don't know anyone's heart,
Right.
her.
Right.
But he made a profession. He was baptized. He attended chapel services, and then he got murdered in prison. And so I'm curious to see how they would depict that.
We'll have to see if we see
if they
him there,
depict it
guys.
at all. I'd be surprised.
That's right.
If they depict it at all, but
Yeah. Peter did the Dahmer guy. He was
Right. Well, this
Peter.
is what Doug Wilson got in trouble with that one novel, Ride, Sally, Ride. Everyone thought like how terrible that you're writing this disgusting story about like a sex robot and all this sort of thing. And he's like, but it's going to happen in a couple of years. Like, this is why I'm writing about it. I'm writing about it.
It's reality. Like it's fiction, reality,
Exactly.
I think last time I read through the Bible, I got to that part in Ezekiel where he's condemning the nation of Israel for their unfaithfulness and says, in the King James at least, it says, "You open your feet to every passerby."
Yep.
I mean, the pearl clutching that would come from so many people if a preacher got up and said the same thing. When it's like, this is written by the Holy Spirit, who uses that kind of language.
Right.
We got Paul's, circumcision joke in whichever book it is. Just chops the whole thing off. Like these are things that are in the Bible,
Yep.
So, like you talked about how prudish people are.
Yeah,
when they're,
and the mocking, maybe he's on the toilet. Maybe you should shout louder.
Right.
Or
just the horror of like blood running through streets, right? After the horse's bridle. Like that's pretty grotesque.
Well,
if that was portrayed in a film, Christians wouldn't watch it.
Well, and people were symbolized by grapes in a wine press just being stomped and their blood coming out of the like put that in cartoon format and you're like Sunday school content,
Well, how many Old Testament stories are there even of like little boys being killed?
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're talking about children being killed, and how many people would be like, "Oh, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about it." But it's the Bible.
Yeah.
And this is why I think Christians need to do better about horror stuff. This is kind of maybe a stretch. But when all the COVID stuff first began and the media made it look like New York was on fire, like we were living there at the time.
Just bodies everywhere.
And they made it look like we just had stacks of bodies,
Nowhere to put them.
Cars lined.
It looked terrible.
People. Yeah.
But I thought this is because people have no concept of like life after death and like where just being justified. So they're scared of death altogether.
Right.
Which shame on Christians. We should be doing better there.
But that gets clicks, right? Because they're playing on that fear.
Yeah. But also there were Christians who do understand the gospel and should know where they're going after they die, who should know who they belong to, who should know who is the sovereign king over everything, who are acting the same way, who are scared and living in fear. And this is why, like, I can remember having a conversation with you and being like, these people who are living in like horror right now, they were washing their groceries. Like, think about that. They're washing their groceries.
I sprayed down my groceries for the first few weeks.
For the first couple of weeks, we actually didn't know. We didn't know.
Seriously, for like the first month, and then after that,
I forgive you. But like, people were doing that for 2 years. I literally know people who have literally not seen any of their family in 2 years. They like literally do the bare minimum social interactions, and like that's it. But they get their vaccines religiously,
I knew of an older woman who had 7 different buckets in her garage for each day of the week that she put her mail in to let the germs die. And she literally wouldn't touch the mail with her bare hands till like 5 days after the fact, because she heard that's how long it took for the virus to die. So she was getting her mail, 5 days late, essentially, because she had these buckets in her garage that she would drop. She was getting everything a week late.
It's wild though, because like the same people who disdain, like a lot of Christians disdain horror, disdain that whole genre, basically participated in one giant weird horror film.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's true.
It's true.
So
just a weird thing.
Henry Van Til said that culture is religion externalized. Right. And I think part of the I don't know, disdain or something against the spiritual is partly because we've actually bought into the evolutionary lie, which is that there is no spiritual, we're just material. And so we maybe imagine these boogeyman things. Like, we do know evil stuff happens, like people do murder other people, and but some of the, I don't know, some of that Christian culture though, I think is that they're affected by an evolutionary worldview, and that would be our culture in general. But anyway, I wonder if that's somewhat at play in how we treat this. But
yeah, there's a lot of layers. So there could be a layer too of people who are afraid of the shadows in the dark because
that was my point.
Okay, good.
Is that they are terrified of all this because if they die, it's all over. There's no life after death, right? There's no spiritual, there's no afterlife.
Yeah.
It's just this physical material life, and that's it. So Christians have bought into that too. And right, 6-day creationism, if you believe in that, you're kind of the kooky fundy person. Like, now that's not right. That's not just the predominant view anymore.
Right.
Well, there you go. Now you have a bunch of fear and anxiety in your life over things that you shouldn't. And it's because you think deep down it's manifesting itself. You think that this is it. So you better protect every single day, minute, hour that you have, because it could be all over and then it's done. But anyway, there you go. Well,
I feel like there's a lot more to say. Where are we at time-wise?
Close to an hour, maybe.
We could probably be done. This is one of those topics, though, that you could go so many different directions with. This is like totally just.
So one thing I forgot to say that I guess will be my send-off comment, if this, we're basically up, is I think we have to be careful as Christians not to confuse an industry, or whatever word you want to put on it, dominated by pagans and a pagan industry. So a lot of gotten to, a lot of things are dominated by pagans that has made Christians conflate the two, where they see, well, 95% of the people that do this are worldly people, therefore it's a worldly thing. Like horror movies, like tattoo. I remember reading an article one time from as a good example, from Joel McDermott, back when he said helpful things. And he was talking about tattoos and that argument that some Christians make about, the tattoo industry is just dominated by pagans. And he goes, is there a Christian makeup industry? Does that mean that makeup is an inherently pagan thing? So I think that applies to a lot of things. And that's probably the biggest aspect that can go back to eschatology. So about 100 years ago, we just ceded all of art and culture and education, everything to the world. And then, generations later, we look at all of those things as worldly things when they never should have been them that way in the first place.
And that just, if something's dominated by pagans, then you need more Christians in it. Right.
There are exceptions, certain things are just inherently pagan.
Yeah, we don't need a Christian corn industry.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You don't need that.
There's no way to do that obeys God's law.
Right. Because that's just sin, right? That's just sin.
Yeah.
Well, and I find it very interesting to find out, because when I was doing like a little bit of research on that, the Hayes brothers who directed the first 2 Conjuring movies, they're Christian, and there's actually a quote from them on an article that I read that said,
it's always great to end a show with a quote.
Yeah. So there's a quote from them about the Conjuring movies that they made. It says that what we've tried to do is create films with redemption. They have happy endings. There's no sex, no violence. There's no swearing. It's rated R because it's a very scary story that happened to real people. This movie is not about glorifying evil, but it's about the triumph of good over evil. So if you can get more people like that in the horror industry, you're going to see a lot more cool content.
Right.
Makes me want to watch the movie.
They're pretty good.
The Conjuring movies are pretty good.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, like Ericha said, we could probably just go on and on about different aspects of this, but I think we talked about.
Is there something major we didn't say? Like, I feel like we kind of tried to like touch on things. We didn't like delve deeply into any one of these things, but
post a comment, send us a question or whatever, and maybe we'll follow up with it. But
we have more of these deep weird. That's going to be our series for October. We're doing like deep weird.
Yeah.
We want to talk about things that Christians don't want to talk about.
Suffer thee not a witch to live. Like my favorite verse in the old.
You can just end every episode with that. That can be your sign out.
Suffer thee. Okay.
We're coming for you, TikTok.
That's awesome.
Our dog has a little I don't know if it's right next to you, but it's like a little witch like squeaky toy that she chews on. And I got it for at Goodwill, and Eddie saw it and he was like, "Oh, this is awesome." And he like tossed it to the dog and he's like, "Suffer thee not a witch to live, Dixie." Yes.
Did he really?
Yeah,
that's
good.
Amazing. See, even our dog is post-mill, just crushing.
I was just proud of our son.
Principalities and powers, crushing them. Oh, good stuff. Okay, are we all good? We're all set?
I think so.
Awesome. You guys good?
I think so, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, until next time, everybody, take hold and reorder creation by first reforming your home, and suffer thee not a witch to live. This has been the Reformed Reset.
But on the basis of grace and on the finished work of Jesus Christ, the project is back and forth, and the destiny of a new transformed world is assured.
I just put the sourdough in the oven too, so I've got like 40 minutes.